Yeah,
Amazing.
I kind of want to jump into you as a podcaster too. Like, can you talk a little bit about the Balanced Black Girl podcast, like what inspired it, and just like the initial concept of the podcast?
Yeah, I can't really talk about the origin story of the Balanced Black Girl podcast without talking about my content creation career before that. So I actually started creating content in 2014 under a different platform. I had started a blog and I was writing about wellness and how I was trying to find balance in my own wellness routine because the 2010s were kind of a lawless place when it came to wellness and wellness content. And a lot of what was promoted wasn't necessarily healthy. The space promoted a lot of disordered eating and a lot of over exercising. And I began to recognize that and tried to figure out, okay, how can I prioritize my well-being without taking it overboard? And so the idea of finding what balance looked like for me from a wellness standpoint was something that was really intriguing to me and something that I wanted to explore and share with other people. So I'd started that blog in 2014. And by 2018, I just felt like that platform had kind of run its course. And so I decided to wind it down and I just took a break from creating content altogether. And then a few months later, I truly was just sitting at work one day. The idea for Balanced Black Girl popped into my head, and I immediately ordered a microphone and launched the podcast and have been going ever since.
Yeah, and how do you like what kind of drew you to the word balanced, or like how do you even define that word for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, balance gets a lot of flack, and I understand why, because I think when people think of balance, they're talking about equilibrium, and they feel this pressure to do everything at work and everything at home and be perfect at everything that they're doing. And that's not really what my intention was. My intention was saying, okay, we're being told that we need to do an hour-long HIIT workout every day and eat 1,200 calories a day and take 20,000 steps a day and do all of these things to be well. And that to me is not feeling like I'm able to do that and balance having a joyful life. So how can I take care of myself, but also enjoy this life that I've been given? What can we do to do both? And so when I'm talking about balance, that's really what I'm talking about, is not sacrificing your life for the sake of being well, because what's the point? Like the whole point of wellness is to be healthy, is to feel good, is to live as long as possible. But what's the point of that if everything that you're doing to get there is making you miserable? So it's really about finding the joy in the things that you do to take care of your health.
Yeah, so what was like those some of those early users like? I mean, early listeners like how'd you kind of get some of them, or how you kind of get your podcast out into the world?
I think a lot of it was fulfilling a need. Wellness platforms, especially several years ago, were kind of featuring the same people over and over. It wasn't very diverse. They weren't speaking to different experiences, especially in the podcast space. It was very male dominated. It was very white. And so for those of us who were there, we were having to do mental gymnastics to figure out, how do I apply this to me? Okay, you're telling me to do these workouts. What am I doing with my hair while I'm doing that workout? Or how does this work with my menstrual cycle? Because you're not talking about that. And so I think there was an audience of people who were primed and ready for that content. And I was, among one of the earlier people to start delivering it to them. So I think that once it was out there and it started reaching people who it resonated with, the community was really able to build from there.
Yeah, and speaking of community, we talk about that a lot on this podcast. I'm curious to hear how you think about building community, engaging your audience. One of the things I really love about like watching your social media is that you actually are in those comments, like talking to people and like really, really making that a thing. So I would love to hear how you think about community.
Yeah, I mean, something that I think about a lot just as a human, whether it's online or in person, is if someone is having an interaction with me, how can they feel better after interacting with me than they did before? And also, I'm human. Sometimes I have bad days. Sometimes I'm a little out of it. Like, I'm not Polly Pocket Sunshine all the time. So if you ever meet me and I'm having an off day, like, I'm sorry, I'm human. But I do try to have a sense of like, I don't know everything. I'm not the queen of wellness. I'm trying to figure this out too. Let's figure it out together. And I think that the authenticity of that is something that really resonates with people.
Yeah, I think so too. Like, I think sometimes when you hear it from somebody that like they see themselves that they see it almost like a friend, like it touches a different part of the like of your personality. Like even when you listen to podcasts of someone that's like I think I feel like I'm more connected to certain podcasters than I am to like other people that I've like have known just because there's that level of intimacy that you really become friends with through their audio.
Oh, I mean, someone is literally has your voice in their ear for an hour a week. That is so intimate. It creates such a sense of closeness that social media just doesn't do. I think the next best thing would be like YouTube, any form of really long form content where people
Yeah.
are getting to hear a whole thought. But social media doesn't necessarily create the same feeling because you're just getting sound bites. You're getting 15-second clips here and there. But for those longer form content, like a podcast, like a YouTube, where people are able to sit and engage in a full conversation with you, it creates so much depth and connection.
Yeah, that's funny because like that's how we like kind of become friends with people. It's like it's depth of relationship, like those long hours and all that. But social media, well, not like you said, YouTube and podcasts a little different, but a lot of times we're given fed like quick bites, and it's like we don't get that intimacy. But when you listen to a podcast, you're like, okay, I'm here with this person. I understand them. If they say, and that's how I think why podcasters really do a great job of building community is because they have these people that will like obviously go and support things that they do and all that because of that long form relationship that's built.
Yeah, I'm really going to date myself here, but I remember back when Instagram first introduced stories.
Oh yeah.
And it was, well, first of all, I mean, also they got that from Snapchat, but Snapchat was different because Snapchat you use to communicate with people you know versus Instagram has always been like a little bit different. That's where people got an audience. But I remember how jarring it was because up until that point, Instagram was solely for photos. So
Yeah.
people would build followings off of having like pretty pictures. And then when stories happen and I'm like, oh, that's what you sound like? Huh. Or like, oh, that's okay. Now you're talking. Interesting. And it made our relationships with creators totally different because we were able to learn so much more about them and hear their voices and get more of a feel of who they are as people.
No, I think that's a great point because it kind of did open it up. I think we always saw like influencers, brands as brands, but I think when you kind of even what you're saying right there, I never thought about it that way. It did open up the next tier that what we kind of entered into now, which is just like the content creator. Like it could be an everyday person that has just a point of view that's really strong, that they say it at the right time and they're like, okay, now I'm following this person. So like, or those clips, like those, even though we were kind of talking about earlier, those clips are important because now I can find less. And then I go and see the longer form podcast and now I go to your YouTube and now I'm hooked. Right. So I think you're right on that. Talk to like, how do you kind of gauge feedback from like your content? Like when you put out podcasts or in your community feed, like how do you think about when to take a concept someone says that you actually want to expand on versus like, it is what it is, like not as important. I don't know. How do you balance feedback?
I mean, a lot of it is like, do I have something else to say? People might be surprised to hear this, but I'm actually a pretty quiet, reserved person in person. I'm not a big yapper. I'm not somebody who is super talkative and is going to be, in the middle of every conversation in the room. I actually really like to be quiet and like to be an observer. And so when I do speak, I speak because I have something to say. So if people request something and I'm like, babes, I got nothing to say about that, or I'm not qualified, I can't speak to that, then it's not going to happen. But if it is something where I'm like, actually, I do have a perspective that I think that I can add and I think that it can be helpful, then I will expand on it. Like an example would be last week, I released an episode on the podcast called How to Start Over in Your 30s. And that podcast was a direct response to a video that I did. I posted on TikTok and on Instagram a few months ago where I talked about how to start over in your 30s. And in the comments, people were like, can you tell us more about your story? Can you give us more details? Can you take this to the podcast? And I'm like, yeah, I spoke to it in this 60-second clip, but I can absolutely expand on it with more detail. So let me bring it to the podcast. So it really depends on, do I have something to say about this that is of value? If so, great. And if not, we're going to leave it where it's at.
Yeah, I think, and I listened to that one. It had a really good flow to it. I think wasn't that the one where you kind of broke it down in like three parts, and it like each. I think just like when it was really easy to listen along on that one because of the way you like broke it down. If you enjoyed that clip, make sure you head over to www.bookumapp.com to download our app so you can connect with your favorite bookish content creators, start conversations, and start your own book club.